and to the question of victory plan with our expert Peter Dickinson, and also of the beautiful Ukraine-led blog at the Atlantic Council and a publisher here in Ukraine. Hello and welcome.
Hi.
Yes, Mr. Dickinson, please tell us, have you heard of the Zelensky's victory plan presented yesterday in the Parliament of Ukraine and today in European capitals, in Brussels? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that the plan didn't present any major surprises. Most of the terms that were listed in the plan were essentially long-standing Ukrainian requests. I think that the plan brings everything together into a single document, into a single place to outline exactly what Ukraine needs. But there's no, we knew what Ukraine needed. I think that the plan is very logical. It's quite clear. And essentially, it is a request. It's a wish list for Ukraine's partners. So it's essentially saying what the Western countries need to do in order to ensure that Ukraine can have a victory, but also that we can have a sustainable peace in Europe. So I think it's welcome to have brought it all together. But I'm not convinced that it will change the narratives in the West very much. I don't know whether it will particularly convince anyone, but certainly it's useful to have it all brought together.
Probably not only the peace in Europe is at question, because we have heard of a mobilization in North Korea of 1.4 million people to the army. Probably, I'm just wondering if the West is so afraid of escalation. When the opposite side, the axis of evil, North Korea, Russia, Iran, when they escalate, and I will regret that very much, and I don't want that to happen. If, God forbid, they attack South Korea, will that influence the West's reaction, and maybe that could make Europeans and Americans more loyal to Ukraine's victory plan, and just say, okay, strike with our missiles wherever you want, just get Russia in bay?
Well, I think we need to, first of all, we need to be very clear about what we mean when we talk about escalation. When the West says it doesn't want to, it wants to avoid escalation. Now we hear this a lot from the Americans, from the Germans in particular. They often talk about the desire to avoid escalation. And when they say that, they don't mean escalation in Ukraine. They mean escalation in their countries. They want to avoid their countries being brought into the war. They want to avoid a territorial escalation of the war so that they are fighting in the war, so that the war is being fought not only in Ukraine, but in other countries. So unfortunately, escalations inside Ukraine do not particularly affect that calculus. It doesn't affect the way they see it, because their priority is to avoid an escalation into their own countries or into the Western world in general, into the NATO bloc. That is their priority, and that is what they mean by escalation. So any escalations within Ukraine are not irrelevant to that calculation, but certainly not decisive. So when they hear about NATO, North Korean troops in Ukraine, of course, nobody welcomes that, but it doesn't change their overall calculus. If those North Korean troops were in Moldova, for example, or in Estonia, that would change everything. And in fact, if they were to escalate in South Korea, as South Korea is a treaty partner of the United States, that would also be a major shift. Frankly, I don't think that's going to happen. I think the North Koreans are now essentially bluffing in order to scare the West, intimidate the West. But we shall see. But I think it's important for us all to understand that escalation does not mean escalation in Ukraine, sadly. It means escalation beyond Ukraine. And at the moment, we're not seeing that.
Okay, so let's continue to the question. I'll repeat that. And unfortunately, we have seen that Russian invasion of Ukraine was considered a bluff too. And we would not like to see an escalation between North and South Korea. But if that will happen, how could the US and NATO react in the first place? Because South Korea is an ally, is a treaty ally of the US.
Well, the first obligation of the United States would be to defend South Korea. So we would see a large refocus of American military force to Southeast Asia to fight against North Korea. We would see American battle cruisers, battle groupings rather, moving to the Pacific Ocean, to the region there to support South Korea in the fight against North Korea. We may also see, in parallel to that, relaxations on the restrictions relating to the use of Western weapons against Russia, because this would be seen as part of a bigger war. And this would reinforce the idea that the democratic world is at war with the authoritarian world, with Russia, with North Korea, with Iran. We're already seeing Iran playing a key role in the conflict against Israel at the moment via its proxies with Hamas and Hezbollah. If North Korea also opened up a new front against South Korea, that would expand what is becoming a world war, essentially. So it would have implications for Ukraine as well. But the most important implication would be a focus of American military force in South Korea to defeat the North Koreans.
Thank you. And you've touched the Israel and Hamas Hezbollah confrontation. I've got a particular question which is of any interest to Ukrainians. The United States are helping Israel down Hezbollah and Hamas missiles, as far as we know, and the United Kingdom is helping too with their battle cruisers and carriers, with their fighter jets. Why we don't see that in Ukraine? So the United States could use their bases in Europe, for example, in Poland, to target down Russian most fat targets like ballistic missiles or Shahed drones, small targets, just to help the Ukraine's air defense out. They would have some target practice shooting, for example, with their F-16 fighters or something like that. What do you think about that?
Well, the Western powers, the British and the Americans, as you mentioned, they have a very clear. They clearly see a very strong difference between Russia and Iran. Iran is not a nuclear power. Iran does not pose a direct military threat to Britain and America. It is not seen as a country that could start World War III. So shooting down Iranian rockets carries a much lower risk. Shooting down Russian rockets risks sparking World War III and potentially a nuclear war with Russia, which is the main reason why America and the West in general is very reluctant to engage at all against Russia directly. Now, of course, from a Ukrainian point of view, that looks like an excessive fear. There's very little danger of shooting down Russian rockets could actually be interpreted as an attack on Russia, for example. But if there's even a 1% chance or even a 0.1% chance that it could start a nuclear war with Russia, that's too much of a risk for the West. The West has a very, very low risk tolerance toward nuclear warfare. That may seem excessive, but I think we could all understand that. Certainly we can all see it. The West is effectively paralyzed by its fear of nuclear war. So it will not do anything that could be interpreted as a direct military confrontation with Russia. And it will not allow Ukraine to do many things, as we see, which could be interpreted as Western confrontation with Russia. So we see that with long-range missile attacks, of course.
I've got just one final question to you. When, I'm not saying if, when Iran announces that it has nuclear weapons right now, will that deter the West from further support of Israel, for example, as not to provoke a confrontation with a nuclear state?
Yes, that will have a big impact. That will change the calculus of most Western countries. And that's one of the reasons they want to avoid that, because they don't want to have that situation put upon them. Once a country becomes a nuclear power, it has a totally different level of influence internationally. And once that happens with Iran, it won't be quite the same as Russia, of course, because Iran presumably will have a small number of nuclear weapons, whereas Russia is the largest nuclear power on the planet. But it will certainly change perceptions of Iran and change the perceptions of the risk of intervening with on the side of Israel against Iran. So really, the lesson is clear. If you wish to be safe, you need to have nuclear weapons.
Oh, that's horrible. If you remember, Ukraine had once nuclear weapons which we gave out in exchange for guarantees, security guarantees from Russia in particular. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Dickinson. It was a great, great conversation. You will see this interview on our channel as soon as possible. Thank you and have a nice day.